Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jedel, and I'm joined today by Ashleigh, very special guest. She placed fourth in modern history in New South Wales last year. So it's a pleasure to have you on, Ashleigh. How are you? And thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Really pleased to be here as well.
Yeah, it's great. This is an incredible opportunity for students to actually hear from someone who's been through it. You know what worked, you know what you might have done differently, if you were to do it again. So it's great to have this platform actually just to have you on here and to share it with the world basically, but more importantly to share it with everyone who's in a similar position that you were in last year. So what are you up to at the moment? I'm sure people are curious, like what is someone who did so well? What are you doing after school? We were just chatting about it before. Just maybe share that with everyone and talk me through your experience thus far.
Yeah, so I go to the University of Sydney right now. I'm doing secondary education and advanced studies. I'm majoring in history and doing a minor in English.
That's amazing. I always love when someone says they're doing secondary education.
Yeah.
And what has been your experience been like? You were talking about before how it was a little bit different to what you expected. Like tell people what uni life is like and what the workload's like.
The workload is quite a lot, and you're expected to stay up on top of the workload of all the readings and the lectures and the tutorials, but a lot of people don't. I'm trying to stay on top of it all, but it's quite hard. And it's really different from high school because it's a lot less regimented. You really got to be patient and take your time with setting up your own routine. And for me, that's important. Routine was definitely a big part of my high school experience.
Okay, well, great. Let's go into that then. Tell me about the parts of your routine that you implemented. I'm sure everyone would be curious as to what your habits were throughout the year. What kind of regiment did you set up to ensure you were going to fulfill your potential?
So I think active recall was extremely important. If you're someone who likes to do some research on study habits, then you'll know about this and you'll know about spaced repetition as well. What I used to do is have just a blank piece of paper and I'd write everything that I learnt each day because that helps you to recall what you've learnt. And learning is the most important thing during your HSC year. And it's very different from reading your notes because recalling is actually like forcing your brain to, it's like pulling out information from your memory instead of recognizing certain concepts. And I used to do that after school every day.
And that was always in the form of writing, or were you doing that active recalling in other ways? Like people have told us about how I made little YouTube videos.
For subjects such as modern, that was hard. I had to draw a lot of what I learned. And I used to have this huge whiteboard where I would just scribble down everything I knew and scribble down a lot of like the scenes that took place in my head. Because I'm a visual learner, I do like to have something in front of me. But I think you should vary up your learning because in the HSC year, it's quite regimented and can seem very mundane at times. So variety is necessary. Should be watching videos.
Tell us about time management and how you actually did manage time around assessments or just through the normal weeks of the term.
So I used Google Calendar. I would set it on the day mode where you have all the hours. You can put in your school hours and your study hours and make sure you're telling yourself what you're doing in those studies. I'd used to do it in 40-minute time slot. My attention span would deplete after like an hour. And you need rest as well. That's really important.
So how long were your breaks between those 45-minute stints?
15 minutes.
So it was kind of like the Pomodoro method where you do something like 50 minutes, 10 off, or 45, 15. So it was kind of, you'd have blocks of hours, 45 of which were you actually doing focused work, and then 15 break, 45 back on.
But sometimes I wouldn't have enough willpower to keep on continuing with that pattern. So sometimes I would take like an hour or two just for a break and I would go out to the park or something. But also within those 15 minutes, you can do a lot.
And how many of those repetitions did you find you could do on a typical school day? Because those school days during the term look a little bit different to how they look before the HSC, which we'll get to after.
What I remember is that I would come home from school. I would definitely take 1 or 2 hours of break. And in that time, I would be eating, reading a book. And after those 1 or 2 hours, I would take some time to plan, and I would write down everything that I needed to do. And I make them really, really small things to do, like recall this syllabus point, or like not even that syllabus point, just one example. Make sure that you understand it, and you make sure that you understand that example within the context. I would also do a lot of writing in those times, especially at the start of the year. And it wouldn't have to be such formal writing. It can be quite casual. Just writing down your ideas, especially for English, just recalling examples or a timeline of particular parts in time. Like for modern history, it'd be like one event, like the 1976 Soweto riots in South Africa.
What did you find to be the most difficult topics that you did in modern history, and how did you factor that in?
I actually found all of them really fun.
Easy.
Not easy.
How do you approach, what's your advice for students trying to get better at answering questions with sources?
I would always look out for the perspective of the author, because some sources can be detailing a very specific moment in time. You have to look at the broader context. I remember one source was from a secondary source, and it was by a teacher. And I remember thinking, oh, there's a limitation in this, in that she is an educator and her purpose is to educate. Maybe that's not that important. But I did end up putting it in. Go on.
I was going to say, how did you approach actually writing the answer? Like, did you have a particular sentence starter that you always went with? What was the first thing you usually said with those kind of questions?
The first question always has to answer the question. It's your topic sentence. That's a given. But be extra clear with your topic sentence and limit it down to one idea rather than multiple micro ideas. Just keep it nice and clear and simple, and make a judgment. I mean, if that's what the question's asking for example, if it says to evaluate, you're obviously going to have to make a judgment on that. But sometimes you're just going to have to begin by brainstorming before you write.
Great. And what about the other type of short answers that you could potentially face? Just a general short answer question. Could you have some structural advice?
5 markers, that's a page.
And that's a written page?
Yes.
Even if it went beyond the lines provided, would you sometimes go over, or did you have like a mindset that, hey, whatever the amount of lines they give me, I'm always going to make sure I go a little bit over?
No, I didn't do that. No. No, I wouldn't do that, because there's no point. And if you do go over the lines, sometimes it can mean that you're not concise enough, which is an indication that you need to improve on your writing. Maybe create a vocabulary list, the go-to words that can augment your writing, that can sort of change up your argument a bit. Yep. So 5 markers I found to be really easy because they're short and they're snappy. But you got to stuff a lot in there. For 5 markers, you got to have a lot of evidence.
Great. So you would always have a topic sentence and then about 4 or 5 points for a 5 marker. Would that be right?
Yep. I think it was that, but for a 4 marker, it would be less. It'd be like half a page. You don't have to be too particular about this, as long as you think that the evidence that you've given is sufficient in answering the question and for fostering your overall argument. I think that's fine.
So were you still particular about it during the HSC, or by that point you realized, oh, that I don't need to think about it like that, I just need to feel comfortable, maybe because you had a feel for the different mark types?
By that time, I was just writing what I could write in the HSC exams and in my practice HSC exams. I think being particular about all those micro details at the start of the year is important, so that you get used to what it's like.
Great. And what about, we won't go through all of the different marks, but just for the non-extended response questions that were still, or that still warranted a mini extended response, you could say, whether that was like 12 marks or maybe an 8 marks even, at what point were you splitting up the response into multiple paragraphs?
I'd say for an 8, 10 or 12 marker, or any of the in between, have a very short intro, and always think about your topic sentences beforehand and think about how many there are going to be, and see if they're different enough to have different paragraphs for each, because sometimes an idea could be very similar to another, but in your head, they sound totally different. In terms of when to split them up, when you're diverging away from that point and your evidence is getting a tiny bit more general, or it's shifting towards another point, then you just take it out. If you're unsure about whether you should be using a particular example or not, don't put it in.
Yeah, I talk to that because I feel like a lot of students, when they feel like they should say more because maybe they haven't filled out the space, they just kind of content dump and they think that that's going to get them the marks. But talk to your experience with that. Was there a time when you did that? And, what have you realized about that? Of course, you just said that, you shouldn't bother with it, but how do you overcome that mindset that if I don't fill out the space, I'm not going to get the marks? Like, what would you say to a student right now who showed you their response and you could see that they had clearly just tried to say as much as possible?
In preparation to your exam, when you are writing and you find that you're writing too much, often you're just repeating yourself. Often you're just reiterating a point in a different wording. So be wary of that. And how you can be wary of that is you just read over again your writing out loud. Sometimes it helps, or get someone else to read it for you. Yep, just make it super concise and don't overcomplicate things. I think a problem of mine was to overcomplicate ideas. And I would do that a lot in English.
And in the exam, if you were kind of running out of things to say, but there was more space left over, would you say just move on to the next question? What would you say? What strategy would you use if you got a question for which you did not have enough content in memory to respond to that? Would you say you're better off just moving straight on to the next question to make sure you don't lose marks due to time wasted?
This is last resort sort of option, but you do like a little asterisk and input your little notes in there, but I'm not quite sure. I think moving on to the next question would be a good idea. And for exam questions, I think if you do end up in that situation and you do have to move on to the next one, just make sure that you take time to plan your response beforehand. Otherwise, you're going to end up in that same situation again.
And what would be your key tips, let's say 2 or 3 tips for preparing for extended response write-in for those sections and for the actual write-in itself?
Scaffolds of what you're going to say, what you're going to write.
So should people make a scaffold for every key syllabus dot point?
That's what I tried to do, yes. But if you analyze your syllabus properly, you're going to know that there are many, many overlaps, but like you'll only see those overlaps over time when you've really understood the whole syllabus.
Did you do, I'd be interested, I'll frame it this way as well. Did you memorize any core materials there that you or you practiced so much that you found you were constantly saying the same arguments for similar types of questions, and that allowed you to be a bit faster and more efficient on the day?
Yes, actually. I did sort of memorize those arguments, but I had a bank of arguments that I would use in different situations for different questions. Also with extended responses, you should think throughout your response and don't just vomit out what you got. And you should also have a bank of examples for different situations, and those examples will reach out to different syllabus points, different moments in time. It can be used for different arguments.
And if I was to take a look at all the notes you made for modern history, and you were to lay them out, printed out in front of you, and including practice papers, etc., all of that, what would I see?
You would see a big mess. I used to keep writing books specifically and purely only for practice responses, so that my notes wouldn't be riddled with. You would see a lot of tables. I used to use a lot of tables because I had a lot in my notes. I had to divide the information up a lot. It's messy to someone who doesn't know the notes. In my mind, it wasn't that messy because I knew every corner.
That's great. So yeah, you've got to really take ownership of your notes, and you've got to create those systems and be comfortable with them. But I think what you said is really important there, using tables, diagrams to help group the information together. That's really critical, because it's very easy with a subject like modern history to become overwhelmed with the content, right? So splitting it up, grouping things together, doing lots of past papers, we'll talk about that in a second, is very important. So yeah, a variety of different tools there that you used, obviously. But the funny thing was, as you first answered it, you said it would be a huge mess. And I was going to say, emphasis is huge. You obviously did a lot of work, right? It might be messy to the outsider, but the fact is you obviously knew the content very well, and it's hard to replace that aspect, right?
I wouldn't say that you have to make your notes really clean and tidy, and don't rewrite your notes so that they're clean and tidy. There's no point in doing that. The content's already there. And if you've learned it properly, it's already there in your head. And all you need to do now is apply it in writing, apply it to a question.
I feel like it's just a subtle form of procrastination. Anyone who is just rewriting out notes, it makes you feel like you're doing something, but you're actually not. So it's kind of like productive procrastination, paradoxically. That's passive learning versus active learning, right? Back to what you were saying before. So you need to be active about learning, and the way you're going to be active is, as you said, the number one thing I think is applying the knowledge. Don't spend so much time on the notes, spend time applying. Even if you're applying before you make the notes, that's probably a better idea, because as you apply, you'll figure out what pieces of the content you don't know, and then you can fill them in. So it's almost better to go the other order sometimes. Very hard to have the discipline to do that. Everyone wants to just do the easy note-taking process. Not many people want to jump in super proactively way before your exam and start doing the application, when in reality, that is the most important thing you can do.
I'd say also to study smart, but rest hard, because procrastination can come in the form of sitting at your desk thinking that you're doing work, but in actuality, just looking at your screen and you're not doing anything, you're not thinking anything. Studying takes a lot of willpower, and you've got to do it every day. So I'd say be conservative with your willpower, as in only reserve it for the most important tasks.
How did you stay motivated throughout the year to preserve that consistency in those routines and those study habits? How did you actually maintain that motivation? Because people go up and down in motivation, and you can't rely on motivation. That's such an important thing. There has to be something deeper that you turn to. That might be external, or it might be internal.
My motivation used to be about marks and ranks and so-called academic success. But by the end of it, that didn't work. And I started to rely more on my family and my friends for emotional and mental and spiritual health, because I wouldn't have done it without them. And I don't think it's all about your own work. It's also about the support systems that you have around you. I used to go to youth as well, so that was important. And it was on a Friday night as well.
Tell us what that is.
Youth at a church. And I would be surrounded by a lot of like-minded people. We used to play games, do a Bible study. And that was really important, because it felt like my reward at the end of the week, because it was a Friday. I also used to go to study camps, but that was really helpful as well, because you get sort of forced to study, but you're also
the environmental factor there is so strong. You put in a hall, and there's a designated period, and you've got heaps of other kids around you to keep you going, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But I also found that an internal motivation or determination or commitment was important as well. And I used to think that, I don't know, as you're doing your work, and if it's really painful for you because you're really burnt out, think to yourself, I'm doing this because I'm learning, because I'm growing intellectually. And this will help for the future, because it's about character building. And I found that having that mindset during the HSC was really important. Not focusing so much on the numbers is important. And don't think that's a competition against other people. Think of it as a competition against your past self, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. That is, you're trying to always better yourself. So therefore, you are trying to beat your former self. And that's a good source of, it's a healthy source of motivation, I think, as long as you're not overly self-critical, and you've got to be able to celebrate the wins and don't feel entitled to success. Like if you don't get it, oh, you should have got it. It's no, if you earn it, celebrate it. If you don't earn it, you understand that it's hard to keep bettering yourself, and it takes a lot of persistence. So it's you don't want a kind of a situation there where you can lose. And I think the way you just framed it, was really nice.
I also think that having the mentality that you just have to try your best, and it's your own best, it's not anybody else's, because during the HSC and actually throughout my whole high school experience, I would compare a lot myself with other people who were had different strengths and different weaknesses, and just know that you got a completely different perspective of life, and your values might be different, and so therefore your motivation for doing something would be different.
And what would be your advice for finding a balance in terms of work and study? So throughout the year, when you look back, your year and the year before, two anomalies in history with lockdowns and restrictions. So I would be curious to know how you did manage to balance work with social life, especially in those hard times with lockdowns and restrictions on socializing.
I actually didn't do that much balance, and a lot of people didn't actually. One friend who was around me a lot, when we did go into lockdown, she just didn't say anything at all. She didn't communicate with anyone at all. She just studied. And you can do that if you want, but some people don't work well that way. I texted people a lot, and I did a lot of Zoom calls with them. I would call them randomly. Yeah,
That's beautiful. I think that we don't do that enough. Just the random surprise and delight calls. You know, if you think of someone, a nice thing is if you're just thinking about someone, just call them.
I know. Yeah,
Tell them you love them. Yeah, or just if you're thinking about them, say, hey, I was just thinking about you. Like, how you going? Checking in, 5-minute chat. Then you're out. And you know, I think like a lot of guys would be afraid to do that or hesitate with that. But honestly, I do it a lot more now. Like, especially when you finish school, you really crave that contact. You don't take it for granted when you're at school, how you get to be around all of these peers.
Exactly.
And people who you think are not, you're not friends with, they're just, you know, maybe you don't connect with them. It's like you will think back and really appreciate that time that you had that community of like-minded people, and maybe not all like-minded, maybe have different perspectives, but you're at least similar in the stage of life that you're at, and that's an amazing experience.
Definitely. I actually used to go on weekly runs with a friend before school, and we would meet up, go for a run, then walk home and have a chat together. Before the HSC exams, I actually used to walk with a friend every morning. And because we were quite like-minded and we were childhood friends, it was a really nice start to the day.
For all of you listening, you know, if you have the liberty now to like go out and socialize and enjoy the actual physical company of others, make the most of it, because up until you're like 25, it's just more important than you think, and it's super formative, right? You're going to keep growing at a rapid rate until your mid to late 20s, maybe even beyond. I feel like I'm still growing, but definitely from, you know, your age, Ashleigh, and everyone else watching, make the most of it, especially at university, because as you guys progress, it's going to be really formative to who you become. And university, just a tangent here, university, the number one value of it is that it's a communal experience. That's my genuine opinion of it. Yes, it cultivates your understanding of things and wisdom, and you thrive in that learning environment if you really engage. But the important thing for me was that I was around others doing it, and it's that what is seemingly a secondary benefit of university, like that it's a community, that in reality is probably the primary benefit, you know, because you're around other people sharing ideas, sharing interests like what you're studying. But that's actually the key thing.
Yeah. I actually think uni is pretty lonely. Actually, it might be because not everybody's settled in, and for the past 2 years they've been doing it online, so they're not as sociable as how you experience the community to be.
Look, I'll just preface as well. When I said that, I'm that kind of guy that I know that a lot of people who are at uni when I was there were lonely. So it's like, you're not the only one. And I might have even been an anomaly, but I at least because I'm a little bit more extroverted and I like being around others. And not just that, I actually just really like the educational environment, which is why I've done the Ignite and Jettle. That makes sense, right? I was in a territory that was familiar to me and that I enjoyed. So I think, I might have been an anomaly, but I think the potential for community is there. But if you are at university and you haven't met anyone yet, it can be really lonely because you don't know anyone. It's all about forming those connections.
It's just really hard to connect with people because we have differing timetables. I have a lot of old high school friends at UCID, but it's very hard because everyone seems so busy. And I think because we're all overwhelmed with the uni workload, which is quite different to high school, that we're just filling in every free hour with study. And you really have to set aside for personal time, for time with friends. But also the societies, they seem like pretty daunting to join, or maybe because I haven't been to any welcome events yet, maybe I should do that.
Yeah, look, I think especially in your first year of uni, first and second year, people often feel lost. They're struggling to find that balance. Again, that word we used. Some people go to university not knowing anyone, which is really hard. I think in your case, you have the benefit of having some high school friends who have also gone to uni with you. And, I had that privilege as well, which gave me a nice kind of safety blanket, I would call it. It's nice to have that a base group that you can go back to. But for me, a couple of my best friends were doing the same course. And the reality is that just makes things so much easier. So I was very lucky in that respect that I had people I already knew, which makes meeting new people even easier because you feel comfortable and you'll hang around uni because you've got them
definitely
to rely on. They're your safety blanket. And it's not that you're using them for that. That's just the reality of what it is. If you know people, you're comfortable there, you're having fun, you're going to attract more people. You're going to be happy to reach out to other people and bring them in. And then you'll make new groups of friends. The thing is, you've really got to make the effort to tee up, let's meet at lunch, let's meet at 1 o'clock at the cafe or the lawns or something, right? I would always go to the same spot every day at like 1 p.m. and meet a group of friends, but there would always be new people at the table. And you don't get there straight away, but you want to get to a point where you basically you do have that core group and there are regular people who can just join, or you meet someone else in class like, hey, come to lunch with us. You need to go out of your comfort zone to establish that core group of friends if you don't already have one. You also need to go out of your comfort zone if you have a core group of friends and you want to bring new people in. I've seen it in all demographics, including myself, feeling that discomfort a little bit more, feeling like, oh, I can just go home. I finished class, I can just go home. Or you could have spoken to that person and said, hey, what are you doing? Like, do you want to get a coffee? What are you guys doing now? That literally could establish the network that ends up being your core group of friends for the next 5 years at uni. So you need to think about it like that. Be willing to feel a little bit awkward meeting people, just tag along, do that. And then eventually, you'll get into your groove. If you're doing a course that you enjoy, that's going to make everything way easier because guess what? Like everyone else who's doing it, especially over time, everyone else who's still doing it also enjoys it. So you already have a common interest. And that's why a lot of people who, meet a lot of people meet their spouses, their husbands and wives at university. But that's and someone was talking about this the other day, and of course it just makes sense. It's like, well, of course, because that's one small group of people, and it's heavily biased in favor of your interests. So you're attracting everyone who also shares the same want to improve intellectually, and if they're doing the same course, they probably share a lot of the same values and interests as you. So understanding that in your class there are a lot of like-minded people there, right there, all put there for you. That's kind of why you're paying the big bucks, which people don't realize, but it's all hexed, which is great. And there's no point thinking about that, but you're paying a lot of money to be there. And what you're actually almost paying for is like a membership into a group that all have the same interests. So I met heaps of friends at uni just because I sat next to them in the class and I had met them before and I just started chatting to them. And then I said, oh, hey, like, let's go get something at lunch. What are you doing? And you just do that again and again and again. And then you'll realize who you are going to be friends with in the long term, and the people who were just, oh, okay, I met them, but like we're not going to be good friends, but that's cool. Maybe they introduce you to someone who you are going to be good friends with. That's some food for thought. I'm not saying that's the only way. That's just my experience from uni. And I think realize what you have at uni, but I also completely empathize with you that going into a new environment, not having, maybe a core group, as I said, I did, but I empathize with feeling uncomfortable and therefore just feeling like you can retreat and be like, oh, I don't need to meet anyone on this particular day or something. So I get that. The other thing is clubs and societies. I went on sub ski. We went to New Zealand. So things like that. And then I met heaps of people there who I'm still friends with now, because everyone becomes so tight on those kind of experiences. So you could even go by yourself or get one or a couple of your high school friends. If you know people who are at uni, that's even better. You just say to them, hey, let's go. I went with like 3 or 4 friends that I knew, and there were 120 odd people who went to the resort, or Queenstown it was, in New Zealand. So it's pretty good. If I didn't make an effort, I was just going to be alone. Like when you actually think about that, that's crazy. Like you still get to come into uni and be around people all the time who are like-minded, similar values, amazing. And then when you finish uni, it's like, if you don't make any effort, you're not going to see anyone ever again.
That's
you know what
true.
I mean? Like you'll
so
never
true.
see anyone. It's all on you. It's all, you have to put in the effort to maintain your relationships. Now, no one really thinks about it as much as I've just explained at your age, because it's all more natural, and it's a period of discovering all of this. But I'm just sharing this, that you realize, especially when you finish uni, it's all effort to maintain your friendships. And if you stop texting a particular person because you haven't seen them lately, you'll just never see them again. So you might have seen them for the last time, even though you hung out with them for like 3 years at uni.
Actually, that's so true.
Yeah.
Friendships do need a lot of maintenance.
Huge maintenance. I'll tell you what's amazing though. My best friends, my core group of friends, are still my friends from year 7, year 8 at high school. Not everyone has that experience. So I'm not like, don't let that discredit everything else I've said, as it applies to you. If you're someone listening and you're like, oh, well, I wasn't that close with anyone at high school. It's like, okay, that's a shame. But now you can, maybe uni's your element, uni's your place, or maybe it's the workplace when you're at uni. Maybe you get a job at a bar, or you get a job, you get an internship. Again, you're putting yourself in situations that resonate with your interests, and then that naturally puts you in a place to meet like-minded people who you have the best chance of getting along with, even marrying one day.
I'm just so used to going to high school, seeing all the friends that I usually see on a daily basis, and not having to put in that extra effort to see them, to make conversation with them, and have I'm just finding that part hard.
Completely makes sense, and I get it. And I think over time it's that kind of natural progression towards that, right? Because as I said, I feel like unless you have the core group with you, you don't feel comfortable, and therefore the banter doesn't come naturally, because you feel a little bit more stifled, right? Everyone's a little tighter. Everyone's a little bit more insecure, which is completely normal and human. But when people are around their friends, they're in their element, they're comfortable, that attracts that banter, that attracts that better energy. So this is why, if you've seen someone with their groups and they're laughing, they're super happy, they're super fun, and then you see them by themselves in a more uncomfortable environment, they might be a completely different person. Right? Because then they don't feel comfortable and secure. They don't have the comfort of other people who are backing them. So I think you need to get comfortable being by yourself, of course, but I think the best strategy is to meet people and then build the foundation, and then naturally more and more people will come into your life who you're going to have that banter with. But I completely get how hard it is when you're first starting.
So how do you find time to study when you were at uni?
With study, I was going to say, you mentioned that you're finding that all your spare hours are studying. Look, I'm going to be completely honest with you. As I stayed at uni longer and longer, I learned that you really have to cherish those first few weeks of each semester, because they're really not that important. Now, what is important is that you don't fall completely behind. So there's 2 extremes here, and I tried both out, right? One extreme is you start studying from day dot, and you study all the way through, but you realize by the end of semester, you didn't have as much fun as you could have. When you look back and you're like, oh, hey, I could have studied all of that stuff in a slightly more compressed manner, not all at the last minute, but I could have done a little bit less upfront, and I probably could have gone to a few more events and just taken it easy and laid back for a couple of extra weeks. I realized that, but more often than not, I kind of went the other way, and I just went, okay, first few weeks, not important. It's just introductory concepts. I don't really need to worry at all. Especially when you start meeting people at uni, you'll just go to uni. I just used to come to uni to see people. I found the balance to go to class. I started going to all my classes, keeping my notes up to date, and I would do handwritten notes. I didn't use a Mac or a laptop for the last like 3 or 4 years of university. I only did it for the first couple of years. No laptop.
Wow.
I did a laptop to type up my essays and assignments, but in lectures and tutorials, I only had pad and pen. Okay. And I did perfectly fine. So because you retain information better, and lectures, you'll realize, are all about the experience, really listening to what they're saying versus typing up every word, right? Usually there's lecture recordings anyway, so that's a waste of time. I used to listen back to the recordings super slowly to go back over it. But when I'm there, it's like, enjoy that experience. It's a live lecture, right? My tip is, I'm going to simplify it down, is stay as up to date as you can with notes and readings, but don't be afraid to allow the first few weeks of each semester, subject to assessments being really early, subject to that. In that case, you have to do a little bit of extra work there. Don't be afraid to do the first few weeks of the semester, or a couple of weeks after your mid-sem exams, to just relax and try and participate in clubs and societies. You know, I didn't do that much of that. I said I did a trip, but I'm also just, when I had friends and stuff, meet up with them, or kind of go to the library and, you know, try to study, but really just socialize or something. But the idea is to do other things. You can also join up for sport as well and play like social touch football or something like netball or whatever. There's a ton of stuff to do. So sorry that I'm rambling, but I hope that answers your question. Okay. The balance for me was trying out those extremes. It's not great to go to uni and to not study for 8 weeks or whatever. Like, and to be honest, I probably didn't do it for that long. And that's not to say I did zero either. I just didn't really apply myself some semesters, but I was there for a lot of semesters. So most of the time I was.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I'm finding it quite difficult.
Easier said than done, right?
Yeah. But I was also getting a bit obsessed with what the standards are like at uni in terms of like a pass credit, high credit, distinction, and HDs, and yeah.
Look, I mean, I think it's fine to have this first year as a testing year for that. And after that, I think you should definitely adjust your patterns to reflect what you actually think is necessary to do well academically, and also to understand properly the content, right? It's not just about results, it's about understanding. But to achieve both of those things, I don't think you need to be studying all the time. I think you can be a lot more efficient. Maybe maybe you allocate 1 to 2 whole days a week on it. And then there's a day where you're going to uni and you say, I'm not going to study today. I'll go into my class, go to my lecture, but I'm not doing any study in the time off. Okay. Like, that's when you tee up the lunch, like fill that time with social activities, and you won't stress about study because you know, oh, I've got that whole day, I'm going to be studying anyway. Yeah. I don't mean to sound like I'm telling you what to do. This is more my experience. This is what I would advise to anyone listening, not necessarily you, Ashleigh, but that's just my experience.
I definitely need to have more balance. I think I'm being a bit obsessed with like every single reading. I have to read this and annotate it and then take notes on it, and then watch the lecture and then take notes and then clean up the notes. And then, you know, it's the same with tutorials. And
let me say this, you're doing everything perfect by the book, right? You're doing everything perfectly by the book. Like, do a lecture, go back over your notes, do your active learning, make sure you tick off every mandatory reading on the list. But the real world experience, right, and the reality is, you'll learn that not every one of those mandatory readings was actually mandatory for you to grasp the concepts. And there are some things like lectures and some types of readings that will be more valuable than others. And I think that's why I'm saying it's okay to have a semester or two where you actually do everything by the book. I did my very first semester exactly that way. Oh, I can't fall behind on this. You know, I was in the HSC mindset of, you know, I've got to make sure I do everything, give myself every opportunity. But I guarantee you, we could have a chat maybe in a year, and you might have a very different approach to university and those readings, which would come from the wisdom you've attained from 1 year of doing it. And I think it's very natural to do what you're doing. You're doing everything correctly that a teacher would want you to do. I would just say, you know, as a friend, I would say you probably don't need to do all of that. But I think it's okay to do all of that for now, because you will realize over time what you need to do to get somewhere. You don't have any references yet, do you? You can't see what it takes to get a high distinction or a distinction. You can't see how little you would have to do to get a credit or a pass, right? So you'll fill that out. That might more than 2 cents on that. Thanks.
No, that was actually really, really helpful.
That's great. Well, thank you. You've been very helpful for everyone listening, because you've shared your advice and the tips that helped you succeed academically. And I think this was a much more fruitful and enjoyable conversation for me, because, you know, it wasn't, you kind of introduced that point about, hey, the marks aren't everything. My definition of success changed. and everything stopped becoming about the exact marks, etc. Which you're probably going to, funnily enough, the university life is probably going to be the same revelation. And you'll realize, oh, hey, I'm thinking too much about the high distinction or whatever. Maybe you're treating it too much like that, and you need to go back to that other mindset of, hey, it's not all about that. And just figuring out that balance there. But I really enjoyed talking about this, and I think hopefully everyone listening did. But you also provided some really useful practical tips at the start as well, which of course is important. Thank you so much. Do you have any parting words of advice for any of the students out there or anyone listening to this?
I really think that you should depend and lean on your family and friends during that year, because I went through a lot of stress and anxiety myself, and I feel like that could have been avoided by spending more good quality time with those people. And as you said, and I said before, it's not about the marks, not about the ranks, and we tend to get quite obsessed with every single little minute detail that may contribute to this thing in the unforeseeable future. I think it's good to get balance and make sure you do that at the start of the year before it's too late.
Thank you so much for being on here, Ashleigh. Appreciated this chat, and all the best with uni. Maybe I'll see you around at some point.
Yeah, maybe.
And to everyone listening, thank you so much. If you enjoyed, like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.